The first gunshot scattered the pigeons from the church bell tower just as Virginia Carter saw Tulsa, Oklahoma territory, from the stagecoach window. Her hands trembled as she clutched her youngest child closer to her chest, while her two older children pressed against her skirts. This wasn't the peaceful new beginning she had promised them. "Mama, are we going to die?" 8-year-old Thomas whispered, his blue eyes wide with fear. Virginia smoothed his sandy hair. "No, sweetheart, it's just some rowdy cowboys. Remember what I told you about our new home." 10-year-old Alina nodded solemnly. "It'll be different from Philadelphia. We'll have open skies and fresh air." "And a new papa," added Thomas, his voice wavering. Virginia swallowed hard. She hadn't explicitly promised them a father, merely mentioned that a kind man named Fred Holcomb had answered her advertisement and offered them a home. The letter exchange had been brief but promising. He owned a cattle ranch outside Tulsa, needed a wife, and had agreed to take on her 3 children without complaint. What she hadn't told the children was how desperate their situation had become after their father's death 3 years ago. The creditors had taken everything, leaving Virginia with no choice but to answer an advertisement for mail-order brides in the Western Territories. The baby in her arms, 2-year-old Sarah, began to fuss. "SHH, little one," Virginia murmured. "We're almost there." The stagecoach rolled to a stop in front of the Tulsa Hotel, a 2-story wooden structure that stood as one of the tallest buildings on the dusty Main Street. Virginia stepped down carefully, balancing Sarah on her hip while keeping a watchful eye on Alina and Thomas. "Mrs. Carter." A deep voice called from behind her. Virginia turned to see a tall man approaching. His face was tanned and weathered beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but his eyes were a striking shade of green. He wore simple clothes, a faded blue shirt, worn denim pants, and boots covered in a fine layer of dust. This wasn't what she had pictured, but there was something reassuring about his straightforward gaze. "Mr. Holcomb?" she asked tentatively. He nodded, removing his hat. "Frederick Holcomb, madam, but most folks just call me Fred." His eyes widened slightly as they moved from Virginia to the children clustered around her skirts and the baby on her hip. Virginia felt her heart sink. His letters had never mentioned children, and she had been deliberately vague, afraid he would rescind his offer if he knew she came with 3 little ones in tow. I should have been more forthcoming in my letters," she began, struggling to keep her voice steady. "But I couldn't bear the thought of being separated from them, and I feared you might not. I've built beds for all of you," he interrupted quietly. Virginia stared at him, not quite comprehending his words. "I beg your pardon," a slight smile touched his lips. "At the ranch. I've built beds for all of you. Not fancy Eastern furniture, mind you, but solid pine frames with good straw mattresses. I figured any woman willing to travel this far might have young ones with her." Relief flooded through Virginia so suddenly that tears sprang to her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting to appear overly emotional on their first meeting. "That's very thoughtful of you, Mr. Holcomb." "Fred," he corrected gently, then knelt down to eye level with the children. "And who might you all be?" Alina, always the brave one, stepped forward first. "I'm Alina Carter, sir. I'm 10 years old and I can read and write and do sums." Fred nodded solemnly. "That's mighty impressive, Miss Alina." Thomas shifted from foot to foot before introducing himself. "I'm Thomas Carter. I'm 8. I can help with chores. Papa taught me before he died." A shadow crossed Fred's face. "I'm sure you'll be a big help around the ranch, Thomas." He looked up at the baby in Virginia's arms. "And this little one?" "This is Sarah," Virginia said softly. "She's just turned 2. Fred stood up, towering over them all. "Well, Mrs. Carter and children, my wagon's just over there. I've got some supplies to pick up, then we can head to the ranch. It's about an hour's ride outside of town." As they walked toward his wagon, Virginia noticed it was well maintained, with a fresh coat of green paint on the sides. A pair of strong chestnut horses stood patiently in their traces. "Your wagon is lovely," she commented, trying to make conversation. "Made it myself," Fred replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "I do a bit of carpentry when the ranch work allows." He helped them into the wagon, lifting each child with careful hands. Virginia noted how he checked that they were settled safely before offering his hand to her. His palm was calloused but warm against her gloved fingers. "I'll just be a few minutes at the general store," he said, once they were all seated on the wagon bench and in the back. "Did you have any luggage on the stage?" Virginia nodded. "2 trunks. I'll fetch them for you." As he strode away, Alina tugged at Virginia's sleeve. "He seems nice, Mama, and he's handsome too." Virginia hushed her, feeling a blush creep up her neck. "Appearances can be deceiving, Alina. We must judge a man by his character, not his looks." But as she watched Fred loading her trunks onto the wagon with ease, Virginia couldn't help but notice the breadth of his shoulders or the gentle way he handled her belongings. He wasn't what she'd expected. He was younger, perhaps 30 to her 28 years, and there was a quiet confidence in his movements that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. After a quick stop at the general store, where Fred purchased flour, sugar, coffee, and a small bag of peppermint sticks that he discreetly handed to the children, they set off for the ranch. The road took them through Tulsa's Main Street, past a saloon where piano music spilled out into the afternoon, a barber shop, and the small schoolhouse. "Is that where we'll go to school?" Thomas asked, pointing. "If you'd like," Fred replied. "It's a bit of a ride from the ranch, but we could arrange it. Or your mother might prefer to teach you at home. That would be for the two of you to decide." Virginia appreciated that he deferred to her judgment in matters concerning her children. It was a promising sign. As they left town behind, the landscape opened up before them, rolling grasslands dotted with clusters of trees, with distant hills forming a hazy blue line on the horizon. The late April sun warmed their faces, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. "It's beautiful," Virginia murmured, almost to herself. "This is Indian territory," Fred explained, mostly for the children's benefit. "Or was until recently. The government opened it for settlement in '89. A lot of folks rushed in to claim land. I came in '90 after things settled down some." "Were there battles?" Thomas asked eagerly. Fred's expression grew serious. "There was trouble, yes. Still is sometimes. The tribes were moved here from their original lands, promised this would be theirs forever. Then the government changed its mind." He glanced at Virginia. "Sorry, madam. Probably not the kind of talk you want your young ones hearing." "I believe in speaking the truth to children, Mr. Holcomb." "Fred," she corrected herself. "They should understand the world they live in, even its less pleasant aspects." He nodded, a newfound respect in his eyes. "Well said." The wagon crested a small rise, and Fred pointed ahead. "There it is, Holcomb Ranch." Virginia followed his gesture to see a neat homestead nestled in a small valley. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees. The house itself was larger than she'd expected, a substantial log structure with a covered porch wrapping around 2 sides. A barn stood nearby, along with several smaller outbuildings. In the distance, she could make out cattle grazing on the hillsides. "You've built all this yourself?" she asked, impressed. "Most of it. Had help with the barn raising from neighbors. The house I started small and added on bit by bit." He clicked to the horses, urging them down the gentle slope. "It's not what you're used to in Philadelphia, I expect." "Philadelphia held little for us after my husband died," Virginia said quietly. "This looks like a fine home to me." As they pulled up to the house, the front door opened, and a woman emerged, gray-haired and sturdy, with a weather-beaten face that broke into a smile at the sight of them. "That's Martha Jenkins," Fred explained, "widow from the next property over. She's been helping me get things ready for your arrival." Martha waved enthusiastically as Fred brought the wagon to a halt. "Welcome, welcome. I've got a stew on the stove and biscuits in the oven." "Figured you'd all be hungry after your journey." Virginia felt a rush of gratitude at this unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. That's most thoughtful." Fred helped them down from the wagon, lifting Sarah from Virginia's arms with a natural ease that suggested he had experience with children, though he'd never mentioned any of his own. "Let me show you around before supper," he suggested, leading them toward the house. The main room was spacious, with a large stone fireplace at one end and windows that let in plenty of light. A solid wooden table with benches occupied the center, and several comfortable-looking chairs were arranged near the hearth. Everything was clean and well-ordered, if simple. "Kitchen's through there," Fred said, pointing to a doorway. "And the bedrooms are down that hallway. 4 of them. I added the last one when I got your letter accepting my proposal." Virginia's heart tightened at this evidence that he had anticipated her children, even when she hadn't explicitly told him about them. "That was very forward-thinking of you," he shrugged. "Seemed prudent. A woman your age might have children or want them in the future." Their eyes met briefly before Virginia looked away, suddenly conscious of Martha and the children watching them. This was, after all, still a first meeting between strangers who had agreed to marry based on a few exchanged letters. "Would you like to see your rooms?" Fred asked. The children nodded eagerly, and he led them down the hallway, pointing out each room. "This first one is mine. Next is the largest bedroom that would be for Mrs. Carter. Then these 2 are for the children. I thought maybe the girls could share and Thomas could have his own room, but you can arrange it however you like." Virginia peered into the room designated as hers. A large bed with a clean quilt stood against one wall, with a washstand beside it. A small writing desk sat beneath the window, and a rocking chair occupied one corner. It was simple but thoughtfully arranged. The children's rooms were similarly furnished with newly built beds, small chests for clothing, and hooks on the walls for hanging items. In the girls' room, Fred had even fashioned a small cradle that could be moved easily. "For the little one," he explained. "I wasn't sure if she was still in a cradle or ready for a bed." Virginia was touched by his consideration. "The cradle is perfect, thank you." They returned to the main room where Martha was setting the table. "Supper's ready whenever you are," she announced, "and I've heated water for washing up." After quickly freshening themselves from their journey, they gathered around the table. Fred said a brief grace and they began passing the dishes. The stew was hearty and flavorful, the biscuits light and fluffy. Even Thomas, who had been picky about food since his father died, ate with enthusiasm. "This is delicious, Mrs. Jenkins," Virginia said. "Please call me Martha." "And I can't take all the credit. Fred here is quite the cook himself. He made the stew yesterday." Virginia raised her eyebrows at Fred, who looked slightly embarrassed. "A man living alone learns to feed himself or he starves," he said simply. "Papa couldn't cook at all," Thomas announced. "He said that's what ladies were for." An awkward silence fell, broken by Fred's gentle reply. "Well, Thomas, I've found that in this country, everyone needs to know a bit of everything. Man or woman doesn't much matter when there's work to be done." Virginia shot him a grateful look. "That's very true, Thomas, and perhaps Mr. Holcomb can teach you some of his cooking skills." "I'd be happy to," Fred agreed. The conversation flowed more easily after that. Martha asked the children about their journey, and Fred described the ranch operations to Virginia. It wasn't a huge spread, he explained, but it was growing. He ran about 200 head of cattle with plans to expand as he could afford it. "You have any help?" Virginia asked. 2 ranch hands, Joe and Liam. They live in the bunkhouse by the barn. Good men, both of them." He hesitated. "I should mention Joe is Osage. Some folks have trouble with that, but he's the best horseman I've ever known." "I have no prejudice against the native people, Mr. Holcomb. My father taught us that all men are created equal." Fred smiled. "Your father sounds like a wise man." After supper, Martha insisted on handling the washing up. "You've had a long journey," she said to Virginia. "Rest tonight. There'll be plenty of time for chores tomorrow." The sun was setting as Martha prepared to leave, casting long shadows across the yard. Fred walked her to her wagon and helped her up to the seat. "She's lovely, Frederick," Virginia heard Martha say in a low voice. "And those children are sweet as can be. You've done well." "We'll see," Fred replied, his voice carrying a note of caution. "It's early days yet." When he returned to the house, Virginia was helping the children prepare for bed. "Would you like me to show you around the rest of the property tomorrow?" he asked from the doorway of the girls' room, where Virginia was tucking Sarah into the cradle. "That would be nice," she replied, straightening up. "The children will be excited to explore." They stood awkwardly for a moment, both acutely aware of their unusual situation. They were to be husband and wife, yet they were still strangers. Mrs. Carter, Fred began, I want you to know that I understand this arrangement is unconventional. I don't expect. That is to say, we should take time to get acquainted before. He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Virginia felt a rush of relief mixed with an unexpected twinge of disappointment. Thank you for your consideration, Mr. Holcomb. I agree that we should proceed carefully for the children's sake as well as our own. He nodded, seemingly grateful that she understood. Good night, then. If you need anything, my door is the first one. Good night. After he left, Virginia sank onto her bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what she had done. She had traveled halfway across the country with 3 children to marry a man she had never met, based solely on a handful of letters. What if he changed his mind? What if he turned out to be cruel or violent? What if the children never adjusted to this new life? But as she prepared for bed in her new room, she reminded herself of the alternatives they had faced in Philadelphia. Destitution, the workhouse, perhaps even having to give up her children. At least here they had a roof over their heads, food on the table, and a man who seemed genuinely kind if reserved. It would have to be enough, she decided as she blew out her lamp. Tomorrow would bring a new day and, hopefully, the beginning of a new life for all of them. Virginia woke to the sound of voices outside her window. The sun was barely up, casting a pinkish glow through the thin curtains. For a moment, she was disoriented, then remembered where she was Holcomb Ranch, outside Tulsa, in a bed built by a man who had agreed to marry her without even knowing her face. She rose quickly, splashed water on her face from the basin, and dressed in one of her simpler dresses, a blue cotton that would be practical for ranch life. Sarah still slept in her cradle, but Aliner's bed was empty. Virginia's heart raced momentarily until she heard her daughter's laugh from outside. Following the sound, she stepped onto the porch to find Aliner and Thomas already up and dressed, watching intently as Fred demonstrated how to feed the chickens that pecked around a small coop near the house. You just scatter it like this, he was saying, showing Thomas how to throw the feed in a wide arc, not too much in one spot or they'll fight over it. Can I try? Thomas asked eagerly. Of course. Fred handed him the bucket and guided his first throw. That's it, just like that. Virginia couldn't help but smile at the scene. Fred glanced up and caught her watching. He straightened, suddenly self-conscious. Good morning, Mrs. Carter. Hope we didn't wake you. Not at all. I'm usually up with the sun. I see my children have already made themselves at home. Mr. Holcomb is teaching us about the animals, Aliner said excitedly. He says I can help collect eggs later and Thomas can learn to milk the cow. That's wonderful, dear, but perhaps we should have breakfast first. I hear Sarah stirring. Fred nodded. I've got coffee on the stove. Was just about to start some flapjacks, if that suits you. Perfectly. Let me get Sarah and I'll be right in to help. In the kitchen, Fred moved with surprising efficiency, mixing batter while Virginia settled Sarah in a high chair he must have made himself. It was sturdy and well-crafted with a little shelf for toys. This is lovely, Virginia commented, running her hand over the smooth wood. Made it yesterday, Fred admitted. Wasn't sure how big your little one was, so I guessed. Looks like it fits her well enough. Virginia was touched by this evidence of his preparation. You've gone to so much trouble for us, he shrugged, focusing on the griddle. Wanted you all to feel welcome. Know it's a big change coming out here. As they worked side by side preparing breakfast, Virginia studied Fred surreptitiously. In the morning light, she could see that his hair was a rich brown with hints of copper, and his face, while weathered from outdoor work, was handsome in a rugged way. He had laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he wasn't always as serious as he had seemed the previous evening. They ate breakfast together, the children chattering about all the things they wanted to see and do on the ranch. Fred answered their questions patiently, explaining about the cattle, the crops he grew in a small field near the creek, and the wild animals that sometimes came through the property. Are there Indians? Thomas asked, his eyes wide. Fred nodded. Several tribes live in this territory. The Osage, Cherokee, Creek, and others. Like I mentioned, Joe, one of my ranch hands is Osage. Most of the native folks keep to themselves these days on their allotted lands. Can we meet them? Eleanor asked. Perhaps someday, Virginia interjected, not wanting to impose. If Mr. Holcomb thinks it appropriate. I'm sure Joe would be happy to introduce you to his family sometime, Fred said. They live about 5 miles east of here. After breakfast, Fred suggested a tour of the ranch. We can take the wagon around the property, so it won't be too tiring for the little ones. The day was clear and warm as they set out, with Sarah secured on Virginia's lap and the older children sitting in the back of the wagon. Fred pointed out the various features of the ranch, the barn where he kept his best horses and the milk cow, the bunkhouse where Joe and Liam stayed, the smokehouse, and the small orchard he had started 3 years earlier. Should have a good crop of apples this year, he noted, pointing to the trees covered in white blossoms. And those are peach trees there, still young, but they're coming along. The property was larger than Virginia had initially realized, stretching from the creek up into the rolling hills where the cattle grazed. Fred had fenced some portions but left others open range. It's beautiful land, Virginia said sincerely. You've done remarkable work here in just a few years. Had a vision when I first saw it, Fred replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. Could see what it might become with enough time and effort. They stopped at a high point overlooking the valley, and Fred helped them down from the wagon. Eleanor and Thomas immediately ran to investigate a cluster of wildflowers, while Virginia stood with Sarah in her arms, taking in the view. May I? Fred asked, gesturing to Sarah. Virginia hesitated only briefly before handing her daughter to him. Fred settled the toddler comfortably against his shoulder, where she contentedly played with a button on his shirt. She's taken to you quickly, Virginia observed. She's usually shy with strangers. Children can sense when they're welcome, Fred said simply. Then, after a pause, Mrs. Carter, Virginia, if I may, I think we should discuss our arrangement more directly. Virginia's stomach tightened. Was he having second thoughts already? Of course. Fred shifted Sarah to his other arm. I want to be clear that while I advertised for a wife, I don't expect you to fulfill all those duties immediately. We're strangers to each other. I propose we take time to become acquainted and only proceed with the marriage when you're comfortable, if you ever are. Virginia was surprised by his consideration. Most men in his position would have insisted on their rights immediately. That's very generous of you, Fred, but may I ask, why did you advertise for a wife at all? You seem quite capable of managing on your own. He looked out over his land for a long moment before answering. A ranch isn't just land and cattle, it's a home. I wanted someone to share it with to help build something lasting. He glanced down at Sarah, who had fallen asleep against his chest. And I always wanted a family, lost my parents young, never had siblings, thought that chance had passed me by. And now you've gained 3 children overnight, Virginia said with a small smile. Lucky man, Fred replied, and there was no mistaking the sincerity in his voice. As they returned to the wagon, Virginia felt a tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying begin to ease. Fred Holcomb might be a stranger, but he was a good man, she was increasingly sure of that. Back at the house, they were met by 2 men emerging from the barn, one tall and lanky with sandy hair, the other shorter with copper skin and black hair pulled back in a leather tie. Mrs. Carter, Fred said, these are my ranch hands, Liam Murphy and Joe Tallgrass. Both men removed their hats. Madam, they said almost in unison. Pleasure to meet you both, Virginia replied. Joe's dark eyes moved to the children with open curiosity. These your little ones, madam? Yes. Eleanor, Thomas, and Sarah, Joe smiled. Fine-looking children, my wife would love to meet them sometime. We have 2 boys about the same age as your oldest. Virginia was touched by the friendly overture. We would enjoy that very much. As the men returned to their work, Fred escorted Virginia and the children back to the house. I need to check on the north pasture this afternoon, he explained. Would you be comfortable here alone, or would you prefer I ask Martha to come back? We'll be fine, Virginia assured him. I should unpack our things and get settled, he nodded. I won't be gone long. There's a rifle in my room if you need it, though we don't have much trouble out here. After Fred departed, Virginia set about organizing their belongings. The children explored the house and yard under her watchful eye, exclaiming over discoveries that would have seemed mundane in Philadelphia, but were novelties here: a lizard sunning itself on a rock, a hummingbird darting around the wild roses that climbed one side of the house, the feel of cool creek water on their bare feet. Virginia found herself relaxing as the afternoon progressed. There was something peaceful about this place, something that eased the constant worry that had been her companion since her husband's death. Here, at least, her children would have fresh air, good food, and space to grow. And if Fred proved to be the man he seemed, perhaps they might even have the security of a father's care again. When Fred returned, he brought with him a young deer he had shot on his way back. "Thought we might have venison for supper," he said, taking it to the smokehouse to dress it. "Hope you don't mind game meat." "Not at all," Virginia replied. "My father was a hunter. He taught me how to prepare venison." Fred looked pleased. "Then perhaps you'd like to help. Most city women I've met turn their noses up at such tasks." "I'm not most city women," Virginia said with a small smile. Together they prepared the evening meal, with Virginia making biscuits and gravy while Fred cooked the venison steaks with herbs from a small garden behind the house. The children watched, fascinated, as Fred explained each step of the cooking process. "My papa never cooked," Elena observed. "He said it wasn't proper for a gentleman." Fred glanced at Virginia before responding. "Well, Elena, out here we don't stand much on what's proper. We do what needs doing." He flipped a steak expertly. "Besides, I think a real gentleman should know how to take care of himself and others." Virginia's eyes met his over Elena's head, and something warm flickered between them, a shared understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of respect. That night, after the children were in bed, Virginia and Fred sat on the porch, watching as fireflies began to appear in the gathering darkness. The air was still warm, carrying the scent of wild sage and grass. "I've been thinking," Fred said after a companionable silence, "about the sleeping arrangements." Virginia tensed slightly. "Oh, not that," he said quickly, seeming to read her concern. "I meant for the children. My room is at the front of the house, furthest from theirs. If they wake in the night needing something, they'd have to pass through your room to reach me. Perhaps it would be better if we switched rooms, at least until they're settled." Virginia was touched by his thoughtfulness. "That's very considerate of you." "But won't your room be too small for me and Sarah?" Fred shook his head. "It's plenty big enough. I built all the bedrooms the same size initially, just furnished them differently." He leaned back in his chair, stretching his long legs out before him. "To be honest, I don't sleep much anyway. Too many years of checking cattle at all hours. Often find myself out here on the porch half the night." "That can't be good for your health," Virginia said, surprising herself with her concern. He shrugged. "Just the way it is when you run a ranch mostly on your own." "Well, you're not on your own anymore," Virginia said softly. "Perhaps we can find ways to share the burden." Fred looked at her for a long moment, his expression difficult to read in the dim light. "I'd like that," he finally said. They sat in silence for a while longer before Virginia rose, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment felt. "I should turn in, it's been a long day." Fred stood as well. "Of course, I'll move my things to your room, the other room first thing tomorrow." "Thank you, Fred." "For everything today." He ducked his head, seemingly embarrassed by her gratitude. "Just want you and the children to be happy here." As Virginia lay in bed that night, listening to Sarah's soft breathing from the cradle, she reflected on the day's events. Fred Holcomb was nothing like she had expected, neither the rough, uneducated cowboy she had feared, nor the desperate older man she had half anticipated. Instead, he was thoughtful, capable, and surprisingly gentle with her children. It was too soon to know if they could build a life together, but for the first time since her husband's death, Virginia allowed herself to hope for more than mere survival. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could find happiness in this unexpected place. The next few days fell into a rhythm as Virginia and the children adjusted to ranch life. Each morning, Fred rose before dawn to start the day's work, but he always returned for breakfast with the family. Elena eagerly helped Virginia with household tasks, while Thomas followed Fred around whenever possible, absorbing every detail of ranch operations. On the fourth day, Martha Jenkins returned, this time with her wagon loaded with seedlings. "For your kitchen garden," she explained to Virginia. "Fred mentioned you might want to expand it, so I brought some of my best tomato, pepper, and cucumber starts." The two women spent the morning planting, with Alina helping and Sarah playing nearby on a blanket. Martha was easy company, sharing stories of her 30 years in the territory without prying too deeply into Virginia's past. "Fred's a good man," Martha said as they worked side by side, tucking tomato plants into the rich soil. "Been watching him build this place for 5 years now. Does things right, doesn't cut corners. He's been very kind to us," Virginia agreed. Martha gave her a shrewd look. "He thinks the world of you already, you know, never seen him so attentive, usually keeps to himself, that one." Virginia felt her cheeks warm. "We're still getting acquainted." "Of course," Martha nodded, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "These things take time, but I've seen the way he looks at you when you're not watching." Virginia busied herself with the peppers, not wanting Martha to see how her words affected her. The truth was, she had begun to notice Fred in ways that went beyond practical considerations. The breadth of his shoulders when he chopped wood, the gentle way his hands cradled Sarah, the rare but transformative smile that lit his entire face, these things were increasingly distracting. That afternoon, Joe Tallgrass's wife, Nia, came to visit, bringing their 2 sons, 8-year-old Kimmy and 6-year-old William. The boys were initially shy, but soon they and Thomas were racing around the yard, playing an impromptu game of tag. Nia was a quiet woman with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. "Joe tells me you are from Philadelphia," she said as she helped Virginia prepare coffee. "It must be very different here." "It is," Virginia agreed, "but in many ways it's better. The children have room to run, fresh air to breathe." "In Philadelphia, we lived in 2 small rooms above a millinery shop after my husband died." Nia nodded, understanding. "When the white settlers came, my people lost much of our traditional lands. Joe and I had to adapt to a new way of living. It was difficult, but we have found happiness." She glanced out the window at the playing children. "And our sons will know both worlds." Virginia was struck by the parallel between their situations, though she knew Nia's circumstances had been far more traumatic. "How did you come to know Fred?" "Joe worked on several ranches after being forced to leave our ancestral lands," Nia explained. "Many ranchers would not hire an Osage, but Fred judged Joe on his skills, not his heritage. He has been working here for 4 years now, and we have our own small cabin on the eastern edge of the property." "Fred seems to be a fair man," Virginia observed. "He is that," Nia agreed. "And lonely until now." Her dark eyes met Virginia's. "You and your children have brought light to this place." Joe noticed it immediately. Before Virginia could respond, the door burst open and Thomas ran in, followed by Kimmy and William. "Mama, Mr. Holcomb is teaching us to ride. Can I go, please?" Virginia moved to the window and saw Fred in the corral with a small, gentle-looking pony. He was adjusting the saddle while Alina watched from the fence, her expression a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "I suppose so," Virginia said, "but be careful and listen to Mr. Holcomb." The boys rushed back outside and Nia smiled. "Fred is good with children. He will keep them safe." Virginia watched as Fred lifted Thomas onto the pony's back, showing him how to hold the reins and sit properly. His patience was evident even from a distance, his instructions clear and encouraging. When Thomas made a full circuit of the corral without incident, Fred's face broke into that rare, wonderful smile that made Virginia's heart skip. "Yes," she murmured, more to herself than to Nia. "I believe he will." That evening, after the visitors had departed and the children were in bed, Virginia joined Fred on the porch as had become their custom. These quiet conversations were gradually revealing the man behind the reserved exterior. Tonight, however, Fred seemed pensive. "Is something troubling you?" Virginia asked after several minutes of silence. Fred turned the coffee cup in his hands before answering. "Been thinking about our situation. It's been nearly a week since you arrived." Virginia's stomach tightened. "Are you having second thoughts?" "No," he said quickly. Not at all, but I'm concerned about appearances. Town's already talking about the mail-order bride at Holcomb Ranch if we continue like this for too long. I see, Virginia said, understanding his meaning. Their unmarried status could become a source of gossip, potentially harmful to both her reputation and his standing in the community. I don't want to rush you, Fred continued, but perhaps we should consider setting a date for the ceremony, something small here at the ranch maybe. Virginia considered his suggestion. The practical part of her knew he was right, their current arrangement was unconventional and potentially scandalous. And after a week in Fred's company, she had seen nothing to make her doubt his character. If anything, each day had revealed new qualities to admire. I think that would be wise, she agreed. Perhaps 2 weeks from now, that would give us time to make some preparations and for the children to become more settled. Fred nodded, relief evident in his expression. 2 weeks sounds fine. I'll ride into town tomorrow and speak with the minister. They sat in companionable silence for a while longer. May I ask you something? Virginia finally said. Of course. Why did you never marry before? You must have had opportunities. Fred gazed out into the darkness before answering. There was someone once, Rebecca, daughter of a rancher near Wichita. We were engaged to be married when I was 23. Virginia waited, sensing there was more to the story. Influenza took her, winter of '87, hit the whole county hard. His voice was quiet but steady. After that, I threw myself into building this place, figured I'd live out my days as a bachelor rancher. I'm sorry, Virginia said softly. He shrugged. It was a long time ago, but I never met anyone else who, well, until your letter came. Something in your words reminded me there might be more to life than cattle and crops. Virginia was touched by his candor. My husband James was a good man, she offered in return, a bit conventional perhaps, but kind. When he died of pneumonia, I was left with 3 small children and a mountain of debt I hadn't known existed. His business had been failing for years, but he'd hidden it from me, thinking it would spare me worry. Fred frowned. That wasn't fair to you. No, Virginia agreed. It wasn't. I had to learn quickly how to manage on my own, sold everything we owned of value, took in sewing, even cleaned houses for a time, but it was never enough. She swallowed hard. When I saw your advertisement, it seemed like providence. And now, do you regret answering it? Virginia looked at him directly, not for a moment. Something shifted in Fred's expression, a softening, a warming. He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused but gentle against her skin. I'm glad, he said simply. They sat that way for several minutes, hands joined, watching as the moon rose over the distant hills. It was a small gesture, this first real touch between them, but it felt significant, a crossing of a boundary, a step toward something more than a practical arrangement. When Virginia finally rose to retire for the night, Fred stood as well, still holding her hand. For a moment she thought he might kiss her and was surprised by how much she wanted him to. Instead, he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Virginia, he said, his voice lower than usual. Good night, Fred, she replied, her own voice slightly unsteady. As she prepared for bed, Virginia found herself revisiting that moment on the porch, the warmth of Fred's hand around hers, the gentle press of his lips. It had been 3 years since she had experienced even such a simple intimacy, and the effect was more powerful than she had anticipated. Marriage to Fred Holcomb had begun as a practical solution to an impossible situation. Now, to her surprise, Virginia found herself looking forward to it for entirely different reasons. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Fred rode into Tulsa and arranged for the minister to come to the ranch on the appointed day. Martha and Nia helped Virginia prepare for the small ceremony, while the ranch hands, Joe and Liam, worked with Fred to ensure everything on the property looked its best. Virginia used some of her carefully saved money to order fabric from the general store to make a new dress for the occasion, nothing extravagant, but a pretty blue calico that complemented her eyes. She also made new clothes for the children, wanting them to look their best for what would become their official new beginning as a family. Fred, for his part, seemed both eager and nervous as the day approached. He spent long hours working around the ranch, making small improvements to the house and yard, and even built a new rocking chair for the porch, a wedding gift. He explained somewhat shyly when he presented it to Virginia. Each evening, they continued their talks on the porch, gradually learning more about each other. Virginia discovered that Fred had grown up in Kansas, the son of a blacksmith who had taught him both that trade and carpentry before dying of a heart ailment when Fred was 16. His mother had passed a year later, leaving him alone in the world. "Is that when you decided to come to Oklahoma Territory?" Virginia asked one evening. Fred nodded. "Worked as a ranch hand in Kansas for a few years, saving every penny. When they opened this territory for settlement, I saw my chance. Came down with barely enough money for supplies and a few head of cattle, built the first part of the house with my own hands. It must have been terribly lonely," Virginia observed. "At times," he admitted. "But there's something satisfying about building something from nothing," he glanced at her. "Though I've come to realize a home needs more than solid walls and a good roof." Virginia understood what he meant. Despite its modest size and simple furnishings, the ranch house had become a home in the short time they had been there. The children's laughter filled the rooms, their small possessions began to accumulate in corners and on shelves, and the scents of Virginia's cooking lingered in the kitchen. It was as if the house had been waiting for them, incomplete until their arrival. The day before the wedding, Fred surprised Virginia by taking her and the children into Tulsa. "Thought you might like to see more of the town," he explained, "and I have a few errands to run." Tulsa was growing rapidly, Fred told them as they drove the wagon down the main street. What had been little more than a trading post a few years earlier was now a proper town with a bank, a schoolhouse, several churches, a hotel, and a variety of businesses. "The railroad's coming through next year," Fred said. "That'll change things even more, make it easier to ship cattle to the markets in Kansas City." While Fred attended to his business at the bank, Virginia took the children to the general store, where Mr. Peterson, the proprietor, greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Carter, heard you and Holcomb are tying the knot tomorrow. Congratulations." Virginia thanked him, somewhat surprised that their news had traveled so quickly. "Small town," Mr. Peterson explained with a wink. "Not much happens that everybody doesn't know about within a day or two." As they browsed the store's offerings, Virginia allowed the children to each select a small treat peppermint sticks for Alina and Thomas, and a wooden rattle for Sarah. She was examining a display of ribbons when Mr. Peterson approached again. "Mrs. Carter, I hope you don't mind my saying, but the whole town's right pleased about you and Holcomb. He's a good man, fair in his dealings, helps folks when they're down, been needing someone like you to complete that fine ranch of his." "That's very kind of you to say, Mr. Peterson." "It's the truth, and those young ones of yours bring a smile to my face." He leaned in conspiratorially. "Between you and me, Holcomb came in here last week and bought out nearly my entire stock of candy, said he wanted to have it on hand for the children." Virginia's heart warmed at this revelation. Fred had never mentioned buying candy, but she had noticed that there always seemed to be a peppermint stick or piece of horehound candy for the children after they completed their chores. When Fred rejoined them, he was carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Something for tomorrow," he said when Virginia inquired, tucking it into his pocket with a mysterious smile. Their last stop was the millinery shop, where, to Virginia's surprise, Fred had arranged for her to select a new bonnet for the wedding. The proprietress, Mrs. Simmons, had several laid out for her consideration. "Your husband to be said to show you our best," Mrs. Simmons said with a smile. "He's quite the gentleman, your Mr. Holcomb." Virginia chose a simple but elegant bonnet trimmed with silk ribbons that matched her new dress. When she tried to pay, Mrs. Simmons shook her head. "Already taken care of, dear. A wedding present," he said. On the ride back to the ranch, Virginia thanked Fred for his thoughtfulness. "The bonnet is lovely, but you shouldn't have gone to such expense." Fred kept his eyes on the road, but a small smile played at his lips. "Wanted you to have something special for tomorrow. Not every day a man gets married." That evening, a sense of anticipation hung over the ranch. Martha had come to help with final preparations and would stay overnight to assist in the morning. Joe's wife, Nia, had brought over a wedding cake, a simple but beautiful creation decorated with wild berries and honey. After the children were in bed, Virginia, Fred, Martha, Joe, Nia, and Liam sat around the table, sharing a meal and stories. It was the most relaxed Virginia had seen Fred, laughing at Liam's jokes and trading good-natured barbs with Joe about a cattle drive they had undertaken the previous year. "Should have seen him," Joe told Virginia, his dark eyes twinkling. "Creek was flooded, half the herd spooked by lightning, and Fred there just keeps riding like it's a sunny Sunday afternoon." "Man's got to keep his head," Fred replied with a shrug. "Cattle sense fear, so do wives," Martha interjected with a laugh. "Best remember that, Frederick Holcomb." As the evening wound down, the guests prepared to leave or retire to their accommodations for the night. Martha would sleep in Aliner's room, with Aliner joining Thomas in his room for the night. Joe and Nia would return to their cabin and Liam to the bunkhouse. Fred walked Virginia to her bedroom door, a now familiar ritual that had developed over the past 2 weeks. "Next time I walk you to this door, you'll be Mrs. Holcomb," he said softly. Virginia looked up at him, struck anew by the warmth in his green eyes. "Yes, I will." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Are you certain, Virginia, about tomorrow?" "I am," she said without hesitation. "Are you more certain than I've been about anything in a long time?" He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her fingers as he had that night on the porch. "Sleep well, I'll see you tomorrow." Virginia's dreams that night were a mixture of memory and anticipation images of her first wedding day in Philadelphia, so formal and traditional, blending with visions of what the next day might bring. When she woke, sunlight was already streaming through the window, and she could hear Martha and Aliner in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The morning passed in a whirlwind of activity. After breakfast, Fred left to prepare the barn for the ceremony. They had decided to hold it there rather than in the house, as more guests could be accommodated. Several neighboring ranchers and townsfolk had been invited to witness the union and share in a celebratory meal afterward. Martha and Nia helped Virginia dress for the ceremony, exclaiming over the blue calico dress she had made. "You look beautiful," Martha declared, arranging the new bonnet on Virginia's carefully styled hair. "Fred won't know what hit him." Aliner and Sarah were dressed in matching dresses of lighter blue, while Thomas wore his best shirt and pants, freshly pressed. The boy had become increasingly attached to Fred over the past 2 weeks, following him around the ranch and eagerly absorbing his teachings. This morning, he seemed especially proud to be part of the occasion. "Mr. Holcomb said I'm to be the man of honor," he announced importantly. "I'm to stand next to him during the ceremony." Virginia smiled, touched by Fred's inclusion of her son in this meaningful role. "That's a very important job, Thomas. Are you ready for it?" He nodded solemnly. "Yes, madam. I practiced with Mr. Holcomb yesterday." At noon, Joe came to escort them to the barn. Fred had transformed the space, clearing away the usual ranch equipment and decorating it with wildflowers and ribbons. Hay bales arranged in rows served as seating for the 20 or so guests who had gathered. At the far end, Fred stood waiting beside the minister, looking more nervous than Virginia had ever seen him. He had dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that looked newly pressed, with a crisp white shirt and string tie. His usually unruly hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his beard. As Virginia walked toward him, escorted by Joe with Aliner and Sarah following behind, she saw Fred's expression change from nervousness to something akin to awe. His eyes never left her face as she approached, and when she reached his side, he took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "You're beautiful," he whispered. The ceremony itself was simple but heartfelt. The minister spoke of the sanctity of marriage, the responsibilities of parenthood, and the building of a home founded on love and respect. When it came time for the vows, Fred's voice was steady and sure. "I, Frederick James Holcomb, take you." Virginia Mary Carter, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When it was Virginia's turn, she found herself momentarily overcome with emotion. This man before her, this kind, honest, hard-working man who had welcomed her children as his own, was to be her husband, her partner in building a new life. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. Taking a deep breath, she repeated the vows, her voice growing stronger with each word. As she finished, Fred reached into his pocket and withdrew the package he had purchased in town. Opening it, he revealed 2 simple gold bands. "Didn't know your size," he admitted quietly as he slipped one onto her finger. But the jeweler said he could adjust it if needed. Virginia was touched by the unexpected gift. She had assumed they would use simple bands of braided grass, as was common in frontier weddings. The gold ring was a luxury she hadn't anticipated. When she placed the matching band on Fred's finger, his hand trembled slightly. Their eyes met, and Virginia saw in his gaze a mixture of joy, nervousness, and something deeper, a promise for the future they would build together. "By the power vested in me," the minister concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Fred hesitated for just a moment before leaning down to place a gentle, almost chaste kiss on Virginia's lips. It was brief but full of promise, their first kiss, but certainly not their last. A cheer went up from the assembled guests as they turned to face them as husband and wife. Eleanor and Thomas rushed forward to hug them both, while Sarah, in Martha's arms, clapped her hands delightedly, though she couldn't possibly understand the significance of the moment. The celebration that followed was joyful and relaxed. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food contributed by neighbors. There was music. Liam played the fiddle while one of the neighboring ranchers accompanied him on harmonica, and even some dancing in a cleared area beneath the oak trees. Virginia found herself passed from one well-wisher to another, receiving congratulations and advice from the women of the community. Many commented on how lucky she was to have caught Fred Holcomb, while others remarked on the transformation they had already seen in him since her arrival. "Never seen him smile so much," observed Mrs. Thompson, wife of the banker. "Used to come into town looking like he carried the weight of the world on those broad shoulders. Now he looks like a man who's found his purpose." Throughout the afternoon, Virginia kept finding her gaze drawn to Fred as he moved among their guests, always checking back with her periodically as if to reassure himself that she was still there, still his. Each time their eyes met, that now familiar warmth bloomed in her chest, growing stronger with each exchange. As the sun began to set, the guests gradually departed, offering final congratulations and good wishes. Martha, who had been invaluable throughout the day, was the last to leave. "You've got a good man there," she told Virginia as they embraced. "And he's got himself a fine wife and 3 beautiful children. The good Lord has blessed you both." Once they were alone, Fred and Virginia worked together to settle the children for the night. It was a familiar routine by now: baths for all 3, stories for Eleanor and Thomas, a lullaby for Sarah. But tonight it felt different, knowing that they were now officially a family, bound together not just by circumstance but by law and commitment. After the children were asleep, Virginia found herself suddenly nervous. She and Fred had established a comfortable relationship over the past 2 weeks, but now they were husband and wife in every sense. The implications of that change hung in the air between them as they stood in the main room of the house, alone for the first time since the ceremony. "Would you like to sit on the porch for a while?" Fred suggested, seeming to sense her unease. "It's a beautiful night." Virginia nodded gratefully. Their evening conversations on the porch had become a cherished ritual, a safe space where they had gradually come to know each other. The night was indeed beautiful, clear and warm, with a quarter moon hanging low in the sky and the soft chirping of crickets filling the air. They sat in their usual chairs, but the familiar setting did little to dispel the new awareness between them. "It was a lovely ceremony," Virginia said, breaking the silence. "I didn't expect so many people to come." Fred nodded. Folks out here understand the importance of community. They came to welcome you and the children as much as to see us wed. They seem to think very highly of you," he shrugged, embarrassed by the observation. "I try to be fair in my dealings, help when I can." Another silence fell, more charged than the last. Virginia could sense Fred watching her in the dim light, could feel the weight of unspoken questions between them. "Virginia," he finally said, his voice lower than usual. "I meant what I said before about taking time. Nothing has to change between us tonight if you're not ready." She turned to look at him directly. In the moonlight, his features were cast in shadow, but she could still read the sincerity in his eyes. "And if I am ready," she asked quietly, Fred's breath caught audibly. "Are you?" Instead of answering with words, Virginia rose from her chair and moved to stand before him. Gathering her courage, she reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palm. Fred remained perfectly still under her touch, his eyes never leaving hers. When she leaned down to press her lips to his, he responded with restrained passion, his hands coming up to gently cradle her face. The kiss deepened, awakening sensations Virginia had nearly forgotten. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing more rapidly, and Fred's eyes had darkened with desire. "I think," Virginia said softly, "that it's time for us to retire, husband." Fred stood, taking her hands in his. "Are you certain?" "I don't want you to feel obligated because of the ceremony," or Virginia silenced him with another kiss. "I'm certain. We've built the foundation of something good here, Fred. I'm ready to build the rest." He searched her face for a moment longer, then nodded. Without another word, he led her back into the house and down the hallway to what was now their shared bedroom. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Virginia's head resting on Fred's chest and his arm wrapped securely around her, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 weeks ago, she had been a desperate widow in Philadelphia, facing an impossible future. Now she was Mrs. Frederick Holcomb, wife to a man whose quiet strength and genuine kindness had already begun to heal the wounds of her past. "What are you thinking?" Fred murmured, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "That sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to exactly where we're meant to be." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I'm glad your path led you here, Virginia. I can't imagine this place without you and the children now." As sleep began to claim her, Virginia smiled against his chest. "Neither can I," she whispered. "Neither can I." The days and weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm as Virginia and the children became fully integrated into ranch life. Fred proved to be not only a good husband but a patient and loving father figure to the children. He taught Thomas about cattle and horses, encouraged Aliner's love of reading by bringing back books from his trips to town, and spent countless hours bouncing Sarah on his knee, teaching her simple words and delighting in her giggles. For her part, Virginia embraced her role as ranch wife with determination and growing confidence. She established a productive kitchen garden, learned to manage the household accounts, and even began to assist Fred with some of the business aspects of running the ranch. Her education in Philadelphia had included bookkeeping, a skill she had employed during her widowhood, and Fred was grateful for her help in organizing the ranch's finances. Their evenings on the porch continued, but now they sat together on the bench Fred had built, his arm around her shoulders as they discussed the day's events or made plans for the future. These quiet moments were precious to them, both a time to connect as husband and wife, apart from their responsibilities as parents and ranchers. As summer progressed into fall, Virginia found herself adapting to the rhythms of ranch life. She learned to anticipate the busy periods: roundup, branding, the cattle drives to the railheads, and to treasure the quieter times in between. The isolation that might have troubled her in the beginning now felt like a blessing. The ranch was its own small world, one that she had come to love. The children thrived in their new environment. Aliner had begun attending the school in Tulsa 2 days a week, riding in with Fred or Joe when they went to town for supplies. Thomas, though still too young for formal schooling, was receiving an education of a different sort through his work with Fred around the ranch. And Sarah, now approaching her third birthday, was talking more each day, filling the house with her cheerful babble. One crisp October morning, Virginia woke feeling slightly unwell. It was a sensation she recognized from her previous pregnancies, a subtle queasiness, a new awareness of her body. For several days she said nothing, wanting to be certain before sharing her suspicions with Fred. But Fred knew her too well by now. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked over breakfast, noticing she had left most of her food untouched. "You're pale this morning." Virginia met his concerned gaze across the table. The children were occupied with their own breakfast, not paying attention to the adult conversation. "I'm fine," she assured him, "just a little tired." Fred's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't press the issue. Later that evening, however, when they were alone on the porch, he turned to her with a serious expression. "Virginia, if something's wrong, I need to know. Is it the ranch? Are you unhappy here?" "Oh, Fred, no," she said quickly, reaching for his hand. "Nothing like that. I've never been happier." She took a deep breath, suddenly nervous. "I believe I might be expecting a child." Fred's expression transformed from concern to wonder in an instant. "A baby, our baby," Virginia nodded, smiling at his reaction. "I can't be entirely certain yet, but the signs are familiar to me." "A baby," Fred repeated, seeming unable to find other words. Then, suddenly, he pulled her into a gentle embrace, his face buried in her hair. When he finally drew back, Virginia was startled to see tears in his eyes. "I never thought I'd have children of my own," he explained, his voice rough with emotion. "Love Alina, Thomas, and Sarah like they're mine, but this—" "I know," Virginia said softly, touching his face. "It's different, a child created from our love." Fred nodded, placing his hand gently over her still flat stomach. "When will we know for certain? Soon. My monthly courses are already late." She hesitated. "Are you pleased, Fred? I know we haven't discussed having more children." His answer was a kiss tender but filled with passion. "Please doesn't begin to describe it," he murmured against her lips. "I'm overjoyed, Virginia, absolutely overjoyed." Their happiness was confirmed 2 weeks later when Virginia's symptoms persisted, and there could be no doubt about her condition. They decided to tell the children over Sunday dinner, wanting to include them in this new chapter of their family's story. "Alina, Thomas, Sarah," Fred began once they were all seated around the table. "Your mother and I have some news to share with you." 3 pairs of eyes turned to them expectantly. "In the spring," Virginia continued, "we're going to have a new baby in the family. You 3 will have a little brother or sister." Alina's face lit up immediately. "A baby, really, Mama?" Thomas looked thoughtful. "Where will it sleep?" "The house is already full," Fred chuckled. "Well, I was thinking of adding another bedroom. Might be a good project for the winter months. Would you like to help me, Thomas?" The boy's expression brightened. "Could I? I could hammer nails and everything, you bet." "I'll teach you how to use all the tools." Sarah, not fully understanding but picking up on the excitement, clapped her hands. "Baby, baby," as the children peppered them with questions. Would it be a boy or a girl? What would they name it? Could they help take care of it? Virginia exchanged a glance with Fred. His eyes were filled with such love and contentment that it made her heart swell. This was what family meant, she realized. Not just shared blood or a common name, but this, the joining of lives, the blending of hopes and dreams, the building of something that would outlast them all. The news of Virginia's pregnancy spread quickly through their small community. Martha Jenkins was the first to arrive with gifts, baby clothes she had carefully preserved from her own children, and a beautiful handmade quilt. Nia brought herbal teas to help with Virginia's morning sickness, while other neighbors offered congratulations and practical assistance. Fred threw himself into preparing for the new arrival with characteristic thoroughness. He began work on the additional bedroom immediately, enlisting Thomas's help as promised. The boy took his responsibilities seriously, proudly showing Virginia the boards he had helped to sand or the nails he had hammered under Fred's careful supervision. As Virginia's pregnancy progressed, Fred became increasingly protective. taking on more of the household chores and insisting she rest regularly. Virginia, accustomed to managing on her own during her previous pregnancies, found his concern both touching and occasionally frustrating. "Fred, I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested one afternoon when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know that," he replied, taking the basket anyway, "but you're carrying our child and I want to make sure you both stay healthy." Virginia softened at the worry in his eyes. "We're both perfectly fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. And I intend for you to keep doing so for many years to come," he said with a smile, leaning down to kiss her. "So humor me, please." The winter of 1895 was relatively mild by Oklahoma standards, allowing Fred to complete the new bedroom before the weather turned cold. He had incorporated several thoughtful features: a large window to catch the morning light, built-in shelves for books and toys, and a special cradle that could be rocked with a gentle touch. "It's beautiful, Fred," Virginia said, standing in the doorway of the completed room. "Any child would be lucky to have such a space." "Our child," he reminded her, his hand coming to rest on her growing belly. "Our son or daughter." The baby made its presence known with strong kicks now, especially in the evening when Virginia was resting. Fred loved to feel the movements, his face a study in wonder each time. "He's going to be a kicker, this one," he declared one night as they sat by the fire. "Probably take after his mama, strong-willed and determined," Virginia laughed, "or her papa, patient but persistent." As spring approached, Virginia's thoughts turned increasingly to the birth. Her previous deliveries had been relatively straightforward, but she was aware of the risks, especially so far from town. Fred had already arranged for Martha to stay with them in the weeks leading up to the birth, and the local midwife had promised to come as soon as she was sent for. "I want everything to be perfect," Fred told her one evening. "No risks, no chances taken." Virginia squeezed his hand. "Birth is never without risk, Fred, but I've done this 3 times before and I'm healthy and strong. Try not to worry too much." But as her time grew nearer, Virginia found herself harboring her own concerns, not about the birth itself, but about what would follow. Fred had been a wonderful father to her children, but how would he feel when he had a child of his own? Would his affection for Eleanor, Thomas, and Sarah diminish in comparison to his feelings for the new baby? She mentioned these fears to Martha one afternoon as they prepared baby clothes. The older woman shook her head firmly. "That man loves those children like they're his own flesh and blood. Adding another won't change that, it'll just give him one more to dote on." "But it will be different," Virginia insisted. "This baby will be part of him in a way the others aren't." Martha considered this. Different, yes, but not more. Fred Holcomb isn't the kind of man to measure love in fractions or portions. He gives it wholly or not at all, and he's given his heart to those children as surely as he's given it to you. Virginia hoped Martha was right. As she watched Fred with the children in the weeks that followed, she saw no evidence that he was preparing to treat them differently after the baby's arrival. If anything, he seemed more attentive to them, especially to Thomas, who was thriving under Fred's patient guidance. April brought gentle rains and the first wildflowers of the season. Virginia's due date was approaching, and the ranch had settled into a state of watchful waiting. Martha had moved into the house temporarily, and the midwife visited twice a week to check on Virginia's progress. The children were excited but also a little nervous about the impending arrival. Eleanor asked endless questions about the baby and what it would be like to have a new sibling. Thomas was more reserved, though he took pride in helping Fred prepare the cradle and other furnishings. Sarah, now fully talking in short sentences, patted Virginia's stomach regularly and told the baby to come out soon. Late one night in the middle of April, Virginia woke to the familiar tightening of her abdomen. The contractions were mild at first, barely distinguishable from the Braxton Hicks contractions she had been experiencing for weeks. But as dawn approached, their intensity and frequency increased enough that she knew this was the real beginning of labor. "Fred," she whispered, touching his shoulder gently, "it's time. I need you to fetch Martha and send for the midwife." Fred was instantly alert, his face a mixture of excitement and concern. "Are you sure? Is it really time?" Virginia nodded, grimacing as another contraction began. "Quite sure. But there's no rush, yet first babies often take their time." Despite her reassurance, Fred moved with urgent efficiency, helping her to a comfortable position before waking Martha and sending Joe to town for the midwife. By the time he returned to Virginia's side, Martha had taken charge, shooing him out to wait with the children while she helped Virginia prepare for the birth. The labor progressed steadily throughout the morning. Virginia, drawing on her experience with her previous deliveries, worked with the contractions rather than against them. When the midwife arrived just before noon, she declared that everything was proceeding normally. "You've done this before, and it shows," the midwife, Mrs. Baxter, told her approvingly. "This baby knows the way." Outside in the main room, Fred paced nervously while trying to maintain a calm facade for the children. Eleanor helped distract Sarah with stories and games, while Thomas sat quietly in a corner, his young face serious. "Is Mama going to be all right?" he asked Fred when the others were occupied. Fred sat down beside him, putting an arm around the boy's shoulders. "Your Mama is the strongest woman I know, Thomas, and Mrs. Baxter is an excellent midwife. They're both going to be fine." Thomas nodded, seeming reassured by Fred's confidence. "When the baby comes, will you still want me to help you with the ranch and everything?" Fred's heart constricted at the uncertainty in the boy's voice. "Thomas, listen to me. You, Eleanor, and Sarah are my children now, just as surely as if you had been born to me. Nothing, not this baby or anything else, will ever change how much I love you. Do you understand?" Thomas looked up at him with wide eyes. "You love us, really?" "With all my heart," Fred affirmed. "And I'm counting on you to help me teach this new little one all the important things: how to ride a horse, how to fish in the creek, how to be brave and kind like his big brother." A small smile broke across Thomas's face. "I could do that. I know you can. You're going to be the best big brother this baby could ask for." Their conversation was interrupted by Martha emerging from the bedroom. "It won't be long now," she announced. "The baby's coming along nicely." Fred stood, his hands clenching and unclenching nervously. "Is Virginia all right?" "She's doing beautifully," Martha assured him. "Strong as an oak, that one." An hour later, the unmistakable cry of a newborn filled the house. The children looked up in wonder while Fred froze in place, his heart pounding. When Martha appeared in the doorway, her face wreathed in smiles, he felt his knees go weak with relief. "Congratulations, Papa," she said. "You have a healthy son." Fred felt tears spring to his eyes. A son, his son, Virginia's son, their son, and Virginia, he managed to ask, tired but well. "She's asking for you." Fred turned to the children. "Would you like to meet your new brother?" They nodded eagerly, and Fred led them to the bedroom door. Inside, Virginia was propped up against pillows, her face flushed but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come in," she said softly. "Come meet the newest member of our family." They approached the bed cautiously. Fred lifted Sarah so she could see, while Eleanor and Thomas stood on tiptoe to peer at the tiny face partially visible amid the blankets. "He's so small," Eleanor whispered. "And red," added Thomas with the brutal honesty of childhood. Virginia laughed. "Yes, he is. All babies are a bit red at first, but look at his little hands, perfect fingers, just like yours." She pulled back the blanket slightly to reveal more of the baby's face. He had a wisp of dark hair like Fred's and the same determined chin. His eyes were closed, his tiny mouth working in his sleep. "What's his name, Mama?" Eleanor asked. Virginia looked up at Fred. They had discussed several possibilities but hadn't made a final decision. "I was thinking," she said softly, "that we might call him James Frederick after both his grandfathers. We could call him Jamie." Fred's throat tightened with emotion. That she would choose to honor his father, a man she had never met, alongside her own father, touched him deeply. "James Frederick Holcomb," he said, testing the name. "It's perfect." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, one arm going around Virginia's shoulders while the other hand gently touched his son's cheek. The baby's skin was impossibly soft, his tiny features a miracle of creation. "Would you like to hold him?" Virginia asked. Fred nodded, suddenly nervous. He had held Sarah many times, but never a newborn. Virginia showed him how to support the baby's head as she transferred Jamie to his arms. The feeling that swept over Fred as he held his son for the first time was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a love so fierce and protective that it took his breath away. He looked from Jamie's face to Virginia's, then to the three children watching intently from beside the bed. "Thank you," he said to Virginia, his voice rough with emotion. "For him, for them, for everything." Virginia reached out to touch his face, wiping away a tear he hadn't realized had fallen. "No, Fred, thank you for giving us a home, a family, a future, for loving us all." The children crowded closer, eager for their turns to hold the baby. As Fred carefully transferred Jamie to Alina's waiting arms, showing her how to support his head, he felt a sense of completion he had never thought possible. This was his family, not just the infant son who carried his blood, but all of them: Virginia, Alina, Thomas, Sarah, and now Jamie. Together they had built something precious and enduring, something that would grow and strengthen with each passing day. Looking around at their faces, Virginia's tired but joyful smile, Alina's careful concentration as she held her new brother, Thomas's proud stance as the oldest boy, Sarah's curious peering at the baby Fred knew with absolute certainty that he had found his place in the world. Not just on this land that he had claimed and shaped, but in the hearts of these people who had become his own. The mail-order bride arrived with 3 children. The cowboy said, "I've built beds for all of you." Martha would later tell the story to newcomers in Tulsa. And now look at them, 5 children, the finest ranch in the county, and more love in that house than you'll find in most palaces. For Virginia and Fred, the simple truth was even more profound. They had each been incomplete, searching for something they couldn't name. In finding each other across the miles, through letters, and finally face to face, they had discovered not just love, but home. A place where hearts could heal, dreams could flourish, and family meant everything. And it had all begun with a letter, a journey, and a simple statement of welcome. "I've built beds for all of you."